Okay, you can
Good
begin.
evening. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Teletown Hall, focusing on the influence of money in politics in Maine. My name is Andy Bossy. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. We'll begin in just a moment, and we're excited to have you all join us here tonight. But before we begin, a few quick points to make. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out to thousands of Maine people. So just stay on the line, and we'll begin momentarily. Also, we want to hear from you. If you'd like to ask a question of our speakers at any time during this call, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and you'll be connected directly with one of our volunteer operators. Again, press 0 to ask any question during the call. So, all right, it looks like we're ready to begin, and money in politics in Maine hardly needs an introduction. Every single day, we're hearing news stories about how millions of dollars are flooding our elections nationally and in Maine. Just last week, reports showed that with more than a month to go before the polls open, the 2014 elections have already shattered election spending records. The problem isn't just the spending, it's where the money's coming from. As money floods our elections, it drowns out the voices of everyday people in our elections and government. And when politicians depend on campaign contributions from large corporations and lobbyists and wealthy individuals, those donors are the ones holding the power, not us, the voters. In a few minutes, you'll hear from advocates about how money is affecting the issues that we, everyday people, care about, blocking or distorting public policy at the expense of everyday people and to the benefit of big money campaign contributors that doled it out in the election. But first, let's remember that Mainers have been in a similar situation before, and let's talk about how we can fight back against the corrupting role of money in our political system. In the early 1990s, our state representatives and senators would be handed checks from lobbyists as they walked into the State House for important votes. And reports at that time showed that campaign contributors were calling the shots when it came to passing legislation. Mainers started to organize and demand stronger campaign finance laws that put voters, not campaign donors, first. Together, we crafted the Maine Clean Election Act, a system of public financing that allows candidates to run for Maine office by relying on $5 checks from in-district voters instead of big money fundraising. Hundreds of Mainers back then successfully collected the signatures to put a question on the ballot, and in 1996, Mainers went to the polls and overwhelmingly passed the nation's first clean election law. For more than a decade, the law worked well. Republicans, Democrats, Greens, and Independents ran for state House, Senate, and governor using clean elections. At its peak, 85% of legislators used clean elections to fund their campaigns. This meant that corporations, wealthy individuals, and lobbyists couldn't put money directly in the hands of our elected officials and expect special access in return. But then in 2011, 5 Supreme Court justices struck down our Clean Elections Act, part of our Clean Elections Act, and weakened it. The legislature and governor failed to keep clean elections strong and instead raided the Clean Elections Fund, gutted the gubernatorial program, and dramatically increased contribution limits to privately financed campaigns. The results speak for themselves. Today, we have fewer candidates using clean elections, and huge campaign contributions are flooding back into Maine. Dark money and out-of-state funds now make up more than half of all the money spent in our elections. But Mainers are not going to sit by and watch our democracy go into the night. We're fighting back with a second ballot effort that will strengthen clean elections, enhance our disclosure laws so voters know who's spending to influence our vote, and increase accountability by raising fines and penalties on those that violate our campaign finance laws. We will show the state lawmakers and the rest of the country that we will continue to fight for a government of, by, and for the people, not one bought and paid for by wealthy special interests. And that's exactly where we need your help as Maine citizens. To get a question that strengthens clean elections on the ballot, we need to collect more than 70,000 signatures from registered Maine voters. This election is the perfect opportunity to do just that. We need hundreds of volunteers across Maine to be at the polls on Election Day, asking their friends, families, neighbors to sign the Clean Elections Initiative petition so we can strengthen our clean elections law and ensure that we have a government accountable to everyday voters, not campaign donors. And so right now, as part of this call, you can actually show your support. If you press 1 right now on your keypad, you can find out, we can contact you and let you know more information of how you can reduce the role of money in Maine politics. Pressing 1 means that you're interested in finding out how to get our government to work on solutions for us instead of helping rich corporations and lobbyists. So press 1 now if you're interested in learning more about how to reduce the role of money in politics. Also, if you have a question at any time during this call, just a reminder to push 0 on your phone and we'll connect you with one of our operators to put your question through. So great. Thanks so much. We have 45 people already press 1 on getting more involved in the Clean Elections Initiative. If you're still interested, you can keep pressing 1 now to do that. But now I want to turn this over to one of our speakers here this evening. We're first going to have Maine People's Alliance, Amy Halstead, on the phone to make a couple remarks. Amy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Andy. So yes, this is Amy Halstead from Maine People's Alliance. And as probably many of us know, Maine is definitely not immune to the influence of wealthy mega donors like the Koch brothers or other special interests. During his tenure, we've watched time and again as Governor LePage has taken the page out of the playbook of peers like Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, really catering to a corporate agenda and his wealthy campaign donors and putting their interests ahead of everyday Mainers. Again and again, Governor LePage's decisions to support or veto legislation have been swayed by those who are holding the purse strings, and outside groups like the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, have sought to create a real foothold in the State House here in Maine in the same ways that they have in neighboring states like New Hampshire. At Maine People's Alliance, we've seen this corporate influence impacting the policies that we think are really critical to Mainers on a number of different fronts, and I want to share just a handful of examples tonight. The first is a company named K-12 Education, who runs virtual schools with pretty dubious track records. That company spent $19,000 to help get Governor LePage elected, and they were rewarded when the governor rewrote Maine's educational laws to allow public money to go to for-profit virtual schools that were run by, you guessed it, the very same company. Another example is when in 2013, LePage's administration granted a nearly $1 million no-bid contract to ALEC-connected conservative consultants at the Alexander Group to review Maine's welfare system. And not surprisingly, their findings echoed LePage's own biases against the program. And even though the contract was canceled this spring after it was discovered that parts of the report had actually been plagiarized, Governor LePage has yet to demand a full refund of Mainers' money. And my final example tonight that I wanted to share was that recently disclosed documents reveal that major corporations paid for access to Republican governors across the country by funneling money through the Republican Governors Association. And we know that the RGA pumped a record $4.2 million into the election in Maine this year, really making the specter of pay-for-play activity in Maine feel pretty real. So we think that Mainers deserve to know who is really writing our laws. We need to stand up to the corporate interests who are attempting to buy influence, as well as expose the legislators, think tanks, and media mouthpieces who are working to advance a corporate agenda. We can do this by stressing the importance of transparency, not just when it comes to candidates and campaign finance, but also in the legislature. And as we enter this next legislative session in which we seek to pass bold, progressive policies that are likely to face very steep corporate opposition, like increasing Maine's minimum wage, for example, our efforts to reduce the influence of corporate special interest money on policy making here in our state will be more important than ever.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. So now we're going to take a question, but let me just remind everyone on the call that you can press 0 at any time, and we'll connect you with one of our operators to get your question to come through to us. So now I'm going to turn it to Shirley Rosen in Portland. She has a question. Shirley, take it away.
Okay. We talk about clean election laws and a corporate agenda and things like that. But how, with a Supreme Court that we have that votes that corporations are individuals, how does it work against what we're trying to do?
Shirley, that's a great
Instead
question.
Instead of working for us.
Yeah, Shirley, that's a great question. Let me turn it over to BJ McCollister, who is our program director here at MCCE.
Thank you, Andy, and Shirley, thank you for your great question. We've spent quite a lot of time here at NCC asking ourselves that same question. And meanwhile, while we see corporations and outside interests dominate our elections with their vast resources, we're seeing the voices of everyday people be drowned out. So what the Clean Elections Initiative will do, Shirley, is it will allow us to elevate the role of everyday Mainers by allowing Mainers to participate in a Clean Election Act that makes candidates competitive without having to rely on these corporations that you refer to. The other thing we'll do with the Clean Election Act is we will disclose the top 3 donors on these outside expenditures that are coming from these big corporate interests. So at the end of the day, that's how we can fight back against these wrong-headed rulings. We can go to a program that has been historically successful, strengthen that program, and fight back against this outside spending that is reducing the role that voters are playing in our elections. Thanks for your question, Shirley.
Thanks so much, BJ. Great. So now we're going to go to one of our next speakers. We have Beth Ahern from the Maine Conservation Voters on the line. Beth, tell us about how money and politics affects the environment.
Thank you, Andy. At Maine Conservation Voters, we work to protect Maine's air, land, water, and human health. I want to give 2 examples of big money's attempts to weaken environmental protections in Maine. They involve climate change and toxic chemical reform. Addressing climate change and promoting clean, renewable energy is a priority for Maine Conservation Voters, but we are up against powerful opponents. The American Legislative Exchange Council, as Amy referred to, is financially supported by the oil magnate Koch brothers. ALEC wrote model legislation to repeal state renewable energy standards because clean renewable energy hurts big oil profits. Maine's standard requires that at least 30% of our electricity come from renewable energy sources. Our renewable standard has reduced carbon pollution, generated local jobs and clean energy businesses, and kept energy dollars in Maine. Yet, Governor LePage introduced a bill to weaken Maine's renewable standard 3 times in 4 years by changing the formula that would include massive hydropower from Canada. Thankfully, he was unsuccessful. This is one example of big money influencing policy. The other involves toxic chemicals. Maine Conservation Voters works to get toxic chemicals out of everyday household products. Currently, we're involved in a campaign to get manufacturers to disclose the use of toxic chemicals called phthalates. Phthalates, it's a hard word to say, are used to soften plastics like kids' lunchboxes, shower curtains, and ponchos. They're also used in shampoos, lotions, and fragrances. Phthalates are hormone disruptors that interfere with our reproductive systems and have been linked to birth defects. The problem is there's no way for the consumer to know which products contain phthalates. ExxonMobil and other large oil corporations produce phthalates and are also members of the American Chemistry Council, which lobbies against any toxic chemical law reform at the state and at the federal levels. The American Chemistry Council has lobbied to weaken Maine's Kid Safe Product Act, the framework law to protect children from exposure to toxic chemicals in Maine. These are just 2 examples of how big money is at play here. Maine Conservation Voters supports campaign finance reform that will level the playing field and reduce the influence big money has in shaping policy in Maine.
Great. Thanks so much, Beth. And I'll take one more question here really quick. And then my understanding is Larry Lessig is on the line, and we'll bring it over to him. But first, let's hear from Eric Johnson. Eric, what's your question?
Hi, thanks for letting me ask my question. I just wanted to make sure people get a clear understanding of what would be involved if, I know earlier you asked them to press 1 if they're interested in helping. I just want them to make sure they understand if they press 1 and they're interested in helping collect signatures at the polls on Election Day at their local polling place, that will put this question on the ballot for next year?
That's correct, Eric. We're collecting signatures right now to get a question on the 2015 ballot that would strengthen clean elections, enhance our disclosure laws, and also increase accountability by raising fines and penalties. So that's great question, Eric, and we'll talk more here in a minute about how we're going to get that done. But first, let me welcome to the call Harvard professor Larry Lessig to make a couple of remarks about our efforts here in Maine.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have been invited to talk, because the work that I do emphasizes again and again exactly the kind of success that Maine had. Maine was the first state in the nation to pass public financing, that creates small dollar public financing in the state level. And other states copied, some not all quite as good, but other states copied and began to demonstrate exactly why a different way of funding elections is the critical step that we need to restore our democracy. Now, my fear is that too many in the reform movement obsess on the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court's role in causing the problems that our democracy has manifested. And no doubt the Supreme Court bears a large amount of responsibility. But the problem with focusing on the Supreme Court is that it quickly leads people down a path of impossibility, because they think the only way to address the Supreme Court is to get a constitutional amendment, and we see what happens when Congress tries to pass a constitutional amendment, so there's nothing we can do. And they become resigned to the corrupt system of our government, and they believe there's no progress that's possible. But what Maine demonstrated in 1996 was exactly what is possible, which is perfectly constitutional alternative ways to fund campaigns, which even if we got the Supreme Court to reverse its terrible decisions, we still would need to get democratic institutions to adopt and to ratify into law. So Maine has set a standard and an inspiration, really, for me, the idea of people organizing through ballot measures to force an issue into the legislature and to get that passed in the state is exactly the sense of organizing and movement that we need to build around the issue of small dollar public funding at the federal level too. So we need many more examples of states like Maine. But everywhere I speak, when people say, how could it possibly be that we didn't have a system of large dollar funding of elections, it's Maine that I point to, Maine and Connecticut in particular, who have demonstrated exactly what's possible as an alternative, and I think is the critical step that we need to build the movement that we have to have at the federal level. So I'm incredibly supportive. I've come up to Maine a number of times to try to help to support this movement, to get the updating to the Maine law that's necessary to help it address some of the problems the court has set up. But it will only be successful if it's seen as a citizen-driven movement, of citizens demanding clean government, and clean elections are the first step to that clean government.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Larry. And what a great way of bringing up our next poll question that we're going to ask folks. If we want a strong Clean Election Act and not only show this state, but this country, we need to make sure that people are willing to volunteer at the polls on Election Day, collecting signatures to get this question on the ballot. So if you press 1 right now, you're indicating that you're willing to volunteer with the Clean Elections Initiative at a polling location this Election Day. So we just opened the poll. Folks, you can press 1 for a while. But next, we're going to take a question from Diane Smith. Diane, what's your question? I think you're from Cushing, Maine.
Yes, I'm just wondering, what is the plan to gather the 70,000 signatures? That's quite a goal.
Thanks so much. That's a great question, actually. And I'm going to turn it over to, let's see, B.J. McCollister. You want to take this one?
Sure. Diane, thank you for taking the time to join this call and ask that important question. I won't take up too much time talking about this, but Diane's right. 70,000 signatures is a tall hurdle, but it's not impossible. We've seen it done before in our country, and it's when people feel as though they need to fight back against a system that is not working for them. So we're going to achieve this goal of collecting 70,000 signatures by being at 200 polling locations across the state. Now, if you do quick math on the back of a napkin, you'll find out that if we need to be at 200 polling locations and have 4 volunteer shifts for each location, we're talking about anywhere between 800 volunteer shifts to 1,000 volunteer shifts if we are to double up at high locations. So what does that mean? It means that we have to identify 1,000 volunteers that are willing to take time on Election Day to commit to the Clean Elections Initiative. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that 3 ways. First, we're going to identify leaders. These are leaders that are engaged in their community, leaders that know how to network within their community, and leaders that care about this Clean Elections Initiative. This effort is truly of, by, and for Maine people, and we need Maine people to step up and lead if we are to succeed. Second, we're going to train those leaders. We've got a series of trainings that are happening around the state, in each corner of the state, to ensure that the folks that are stepping up for this campaign not only are ready to succeed, but also know how to talk about this issue to their friends and neighbors and know how to recruit volunteer teams to ensure that we are truly pushing forward an effort that puts Maine people first. And then finally, we're going to do what I like to call engage the enraged, which means that we're going to reach out to people who are upset about money in politics for a variety of reasons. And it's not necessarily the people that are upset about money in politics because they care about the Clean Election Act, because we have a lot of those people. But these are the people who are seeing the reforms that they care about be blocked, whether it's Caitlin from Northern Maine who had to drop out of school because she couldn't afford her student loans because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are able to lobby ridiculous student loan policies, or if it's Stuart, who had to fight against brain cancer because cell phone companies do not have to label radiation issues, or even if it's some people within our own staff who have traveled around the world to see what people are willing to do to fight for democracy. We have something special here in Maine, and this issue is unique because we're able to engage people where they are. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Green, or Independent, big money is blocking the reform that you want to see, and those are the people we have to engage to fill those shifts. So thanks for your question, Diane, and thanks for taking the time to join this call.
Thanks so much, BJ. So just a reminder to everyone that if you want to ask a question, press 0, and we'll connect you with an operator. We have quite a few people in the queue, but welcome more. Next, I want to turn it over to Ann Luther with the League of Women Voters to make a couple of remarks.
Thanks so much, Andy. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We never endorse parties or candidates, but the League of Women Voters is proud to join the fight for a stronger clean election law. Listen, this country was founded on the ideal of one person, one vote, and we are today part of a long tradition spanning almost 2 centuries of work to realize that ideal. From the elimination of property qualifications for white men, through the abolition of suffrage qualifications based on race, to granting women the right to vote, outlawing poll taxes and literacy tests, and finally extending the franchise to anyone old enough to serve in our armed forces. Alas, almost 100 years after the founding of the League of Women Voters, and despite so much progress, the inclusive democracy for which we work still faces very serious 21st century challenges, from gerrymandering to new voting restrictions. But none of these threats to the ideal of political equality is more serious than the threat of big money in politics. Today, we have more wealth and income disparity than at any time in the last century, and the wealthy are using their money to shape political outcomes. Research at the federal level shows that legislators and policymakers from all political backgrounds are vastly more attentive to the interests of their donors than they are to those of ordinary voters. Although we each get one vote, and some of us have a hard time hanging on to that, we are not all represented with the same vigor. When big money donors spend in political campaigns, they create a feedback loop in public policy that furthers their own interests, deepening the political and economic chasm between themselves and everyone else. Mainers have rejected this type of influence in the past by enacting the Clean Election Act, and we're eager to do it again now. Mainers object to the growing role of big money in politics. We believe government should be accountable to everyday voters, not just to wealthy campaign donors. And we believe the Clean Elections Initiative will restore our first-in-the-nation law. Since it went into effect in 2000, the Clean Election Act has done so much for Maine people. It allowed good people from diverse backgrounds to run for office. It kept candidates focused on voters, not donors, and it allowed legislators to serve in office without strings to big money. Most states do not enjoy such inclusive and open elections. Before court and legislative action, 85% of Maine lawmakers used clean elections to fund their races. That included Democrats, Republicans, Greens, and Independents. Not only was Maine the first state in the nation to have a statewide public funding law, it was also the most successful. And clean elections has allowed Maine to have more working class people serve in the legislature than in any other legislature in the country. That's something to be proud of, and it's worth fighting for. While it's been discouraging for us to see the successful program diminished, it is very exciting to see Maine people stand up for the future of clean elections by collecting signatures and getting their friends and neighbors involved. The Clean Elections Initiative is our best chance to restore, strengthen, and ensure the success of clean elections for the next generation of Mainers, and it starts with all of us taking action right now. Please join us.
Thank you so much, Ann. We're going to take another question now. Let's go to Peter Garrett in Winslow, Maine.
Hi. Yes, I didn't think that there was a very good answer or a very complete answer to the first question, and that is that we have a Supreme Court that tells us that corporations are people and they can contribute just like you and I. So how is our new law, I'm afraid I haven't read any of the details, how is our proposed new law going to handle that? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. This is a great question. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over to Larry and ask him to talk about what we can do within the current confines of these court rulings to strengthen democracy and to get to Peter's question here.
Right. I mean, and this is part of what I was talking about when I was suggesting that I think that too often people in the reform movement are too focused on the courts. Because the reality is, even if the Supreme Court and Citizens United had said corporations are not persons, corporations cannot spend unlimited amounts of money in campaigns, and super PACs are not required by the First Amendment, we still would have a system where the tiniest fraction of the 1%, I think, basically 0.05% of America, are the relevant funders of campaigns, meaning the people who give enough money so that anybody cares about what they think and therefore bend their policies to the wishes of this 0.05%. That tiny, tiny fraction have enormous power in our political system because of the way we fund elections. And so the critical thing at the federal level is for us to fund elections differently. And that's what Maine's law does. Because of the way Maine originally structured its law, and now if it were updated would reinforce this structuring, candidates in Maine can run for the legislature even if they're not wealthy or even if they don't have wealthy friends, even if they can't raise tons of money in order to run. And when they do run, they get to spend their time talking to voters, not spend all their time talking to the tiniest fraction of the 1% who fund campaigns. So this way of funding elections actually makes the candidates much more responsive to the actual voters. And Maine has the most blue-collar legislature of any legislature because people, not just lawyers or wealthy people can afford to run, but ordinary people can afford to be parts of that legislature too. So that is the critical change that's got to happen. Now, it's certainly true that we've got to find a way to cut back on some of the craziness the Supreme Court has unleashed. But it's my view, and I teach constitutional law, and I spent the last 20 years studying this question carefully. It's my view that the court does actually have a way to move back from the edge of insanity that they're standing in right now, and have a strong incentive to do that. So I think it's important to build the recognition for the need to change the way we fund elections as the first important step to be taken. And if Maine does it in Maine's law, that will bolster the movement nationally for the federal law.
Great. Thanks so much, Larry. I hope that, Peter, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. That it made a lot of sense. That because Maine's law, as I can remember it, says that you can only make small contributions.
Right. What we have in Maine is an alternative to big money fundraising called the Clean Election Act, where candidates, instead of raising big money contributions from people anywhere in the country, they instead have to rely on in-district voters for $5 checks to demonstrate support, and then they get a grant of public funds to be able to run their campaign. And the benefit is that they have an elected official at that point that is directly accountable to them. Great. So let's take one more question here. We have Terry Hayes and Buckfield.
Hi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to listen in. I'm sorry that I can't help on Election Day because I'll be otherwise employed, but I did want to offer a comment and a suggestion. I would advise that the examples of abuse should include those from the Democratic side of the aisle as well as the Republican side. It troubles me that in the examples that were offered, there weren't any that specifically related to Democratic allies, because the problem exists. It's pervasive. It doesn't pick sides of the aisle, in my direct experience. The second thing I was going to suggest is that I'm hoping in this rendition that there'll be language that prevents legislators from running as clean election candidates and having PACs, because that was a flaw, or I believe it to be a flaw in the existing law, that was an end run around the intent. And I think in order to achieve the outcomes that you seek, we would need to correct that flaw this time around. But I'm very
Thanks, Terry. Oops, I think I might have just lost her. So we have two questions here, and let's take the first one, which is, how does this issue affect both Democrats, Republicans, Greens, and Independents? And I'm going to bounce this one back over to Larry as well, who's someone that travels the country listening to different people's ideologies and different problems that they see with money and politics from their different political standpoints.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. You can translate this issue into the language of Republicans, the language of Tea Parties people, the language of independents, the language of progressives, the language of liberals and Democrats, because they each have an issue that they care about, that it's pretty obvious money is blocking the achievement of reform on that issue. So, Tea Party people like Sarah Palin or Rand Paul talk about crony capitalism in America, which is estimated by the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, to cost $100 billion in our federal budget every year. Well, it doesn't take much to get a Tea Party person who cares about crony capitalism to recognize that the reason we have a system of crony capitalism is that that's the return that Congress has to give to the people who are funding their campaigns. And if the cronies were not funding campaigns or weren't called upon to fund campaigns, there wouldn't be any reason to give them these special favors from the government. So that's a way to rally them to this side. People on the left look at climate change or look at health care or look at the opportunities for the poor, the inequality gap that gets produced inside of our society. It doesn't take many steps to get them to see the way all of those issues are tied directly to the way in which we fund campaigns. Tom Steyer, God bless him, spending $100 million to fund campaign candidates who are going to stand up to try to get climate change legislation passed. He's fighting a battle against an industry that makes $100 billion in profit every year. So unless we can find a way to change the role of money in politics, all of these good efforts are just going to go to waste. And what I've found is that when you're willing to speak in the language of the people you're talking to, and recognize, that there are differences and differences of things that they care about, but they can come to see the common enemy that exists between us, and that's the way we fund campaigns. You can begin to get progress towards some recognition of the need to find a solution that gives us at least a fighting chance for the kinds of changes that we want. And my view is this is the critical step necessary to win, because if this is seen as a liberal issue or seen as just a conservative issue, we can never win. But if it's seen as a cross-partisan, citizen-first issue, before we're Republicans or before we're Democrats, we're citizens. If we're citizens first, then I think we can get the movement necessary to be successful.
Thanks, Larry. I think this brings up an important part. In the past few years, we've seen the rise of both a liberal group, Occupy Wall Street, but also a conservative group, the Tea Partiers, and both of them share the same message, which is taking our government back. So whether you want to reduce red tape in government or have a clean environment or whatever your issue is, money is distorting the lens by which our elected officials are going to get done. And nothing that we want to get done is going to be possible as long as the funders don't want it to be possible. So I think this is going to turn us to another poll question here. So right now, what we're going to do is, if you're interested in attending one of our volunteer trainings around the Clean Elections Initiative, you can press 1 right now, and a volunteer would follow up with you about a local training. We have 4 of them across the state. So press 1 if you're interested in attending one of these volunteer trainings. I think we have one in Bangor, Lewiston, Midcoast. There's one in Portland. And I think we're even trying to line one up for the MDI area. So press 1 now if you're interested in attending one of these trainings, and we'll follow up with you. I was just confirmed we are having one on the Mount Desert Island area as well. So that's great. So, and also one more reminder. If you have a question right now, please press 0 and you'll talk to one of our operators. I know BJ is telling me that we had a question from Cynthia. BJ, what's the question you heard from Cynthia?
Cynthia's from Brooklyn, and Cynthia had a question about how the Clean Election Act worked exactly and what improvements we were proposing in the initiative, Andy.
Great, cool. Ann, if you're still there, do you want to answer this question?
I am still here. The way the Clean Election Act worked when it was first initiated was that candidates would qualify for public funding by collecting a certain number of $5 qualifying contributions. And once they qualified, they would get an initial distribution. And then if they were outspent by a privately financed opponent, or if there were independent expenditures in opposition to them in the race, they could get what was called matching funds. It was the matching funds piece that was struck down. And so where we are left today is that the candidates who qualify for clean elections can get their initial distribution, which is really quite low. And if they are outspent by a privately financed opponent, or if they have independent spending against them, they're left completely helpless, flat-footed, unable to raise any more money or remain competitive in that race. So our proposal is to allow those candidates who qualify for public funding to continue to collect $5 qualifying contributions and to continue to get additional supplemental public funding in their race so that they may remain competitive in a highly competitive race. That's a proposal. Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. I know we can't get Cynthia on now because of the technical difficulty, but I think that's pretty good. I'm going to ask, let's see, another question here. Let's go to Carmen in Thomaston, Maine.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say, Andy, that the second part of a question that I don't remember her name, who called a few questions back, was about leadership PACs. And I just wanted to say that our former Senator Olympia Snowe has come out to say that leadership PACs in the long run have got to go. Perhaps we can't do this this year, but we have to keep that in mind, that they will have to go in the long run.
Thanks very much, Carmen. So I'll take a little bit of a stab at this. So I think what Terry and Carmen brought up is this idea that legislators can have these PACs that they raise money into. And it's the opinion of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections that there is a problem with the obscene amount of money that is raised into these leadership PACs by lawmakers, and that we have to address them. Unfortunately, it's not included in this particular legislation right now, but we are fighting on the state level in the legislature to address that issue as well, and we're definitely going to need volunteers to help us fight in the State House to do that later on. So thanks, Carmen. So let's do one more question here. We have Marianne in, I believe it's Freeport, Maine. What's your question, Marianne?
Yes, I'd like to know how many state legislators or what percentage of people running for state legislature are registered for clean election funding?
That's a great question, Marianne. Let me bat this one back over to Ann Luther at the League of Women Voters.
Well, this is Ann. At its peak in, I think it was probably 2010, 85% of elected legislators used public funding. In the Senate, that figure was 94% and included virtually all Republicans, Democrats, and independent senators. I think there were only 2 senators that year. By far the majority of members of the Senate, and it was way over 3/4 of the members of the House of Representatives as well. Today, that number is, I believe, under 60%, and Andy and BJ can correct me, but it has been difficult for candidates in competitive races to elect the clean election option because they know that if they're in a competitive race, they may not have the resources they need.
BJ, you want to weigh in on this? Thanks, Ann.
Sure. Thank you for your question, Marianne. And I think that you touched on something that's really important. Not only are we looking at state legislative candidates, but we're also looking at a gubernatorial program. If there's one office that is most important not to be subject to special interest influence, it's the office of the governor. And for the first time since the inception of the Clean Election Act, we do not have a gubernatorial clean elections program. And what it's offering is a snapshot of what Maine might look like without clean elections. And after doing some research in the most recent reports, what we found is not only do we see more money being raised than ever before, but we've already seen 4 times the amount of out-of-state money pour into this gubernatorial election in the coffers of the campaigns than in the entire 2010 election. So if you want to see what Maine might look like without clean elections, this gubernatorial race is a perfect snapshot, and I'll tell you, it's not pretty, and it's not about Maine voters. So thanks for your question, Marianne.
Thanks, BJ. So let's do one last poll question here really quick. So we talked a lot about the 200 polling locations that we need to cover to collect these 70,000 signatures, And so right now, if you are interested in being what's called a poll captain, and we'll help you through this, but adopting a poll location of your own to make sure it's covered from open to close on Election Day, please press 1, please press 2, or apparently either 1 or 2 will work. So press 1, and we'll go from there. So again, this question is, if you're interested in learning more about being a poll captain, adopting a poll on this Election Day, press 1 right now, and we will follow up with you about how you can do that. Great. So speaking of polling locations, we need a poll captain in Searsport, and our next caller is actually from Searsport. So let's take this one last question and from Meredith, and we'll go from there. Hold on one second, Meredith. Take it away.
Hi, my name is Meredith. I'm from Searsport. And my question is, I'm active in my community. I support local candidates. But when I am going out and canvassing, I very often come to people who have received all their political information from very biased sources like Fox News. And it's very difficult to have a rational conversation with them because they believe in facts that are not accurate. And it's very hard to talk to them. And I was just wondering if you have any advice on how to talk to people who have gotten their information from faulty sources.
That's a good question, Meredith. Larry, do you want to take a stab at this?
It's really hard because one of the very unfortunate facts of modern media is that there's basically people have their sources and they will not listen to people who question the basis of their sources, even if there's pretty objective evidence that those sources are really flawed. I mean, one of the most amazing sources for the kind of craziness of current political talk is these chain emails that there's actually websites devoted to demonstrating the falsities in these emails. And if you get one of them and you just basically plug the whole email into Google, you can find these websites pretty quickly, and they show you exactly the lies that are being told in them. But especially for older people who rely on this as the way that they get access to information about politics sent to them by what seems to be friends, like my father, for example, they become quite worked up because they believe what's being told to them is the truth. I don't know how many times I've tried to convince my father that no, in fact, Barack Obama is not a Muslim from Africa. But he shows me the emails that prove on the opposite side. And I think the only thing to do is to engage with them patiently and respectfully and with the facts, and not kind of question them, and to focus on the facts and the sources. But it's not easy because we don't have a common basis to rely on, and that makes the fight all the more difficult.
Great. Thanks so much, Larry. So I think we're getting towards the end of our call here. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining this call. We are gearing up for an election day that's really important. As you know, we're looking to cover all these polling locations and not only show Maine people, but the nation that we can and will do something about this money and politics issue. Just as the sun first hits the Maine Islands every beginning of the day and the Dirigo star shines first at night, we can prove that as Maine goes, so goes the nation, that's once again true, that victory by the people, of the people, by the people, and for the people is possible, and that this state and country will hold true to the promise that will leave our next generation with a more perfect nation and more perfect government. I am so grateful for all of you joining this call, and we are going to get this done by strengthening our democracy through the Clean Elections Initiative, and it's going to start right now with collecting of these signatures. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you'll continue to be in touch with us, and I hope you'll collect signatures on Election Day for the Clean Elections Initiative. Thanks so much for joining this call.
Thank you.